The greatest revelation isn't something we discover. It's something we remember. We're born knowing how to simply be, yet somewhere along the way, we forget. We trade our natural state for a desperate search to become something else. I find it fascinating that while we are climbing mountains and crossing oceans in search of awakening, the truth we seek has never left us. It's like the sun searching for light, or the ocean searching for water. Consider this. Right now, as you listen to these words, beneath all your thoughts and sensations, beneath all your hopes and fears, there is a silent presence, an awareness that's witnessing it all. This awareness is not something you do. It's what you are. Let's explore together this remarkable territory of simply being, not as a concept or philosophy, but as the living reality that we've somehow managed to overlook. The most extraordinary paradox I've encountered in my explorations is how we struggle with simply being when it's the most natural thing in the world. It's rather like a fish searching desperately for water while swimming in the ocean. You see, we are convinced that being is something we must achieve, something we must work towards. What an absurd situation. Consider this. You didn't come into this world. You came out of it like a leaf from a tree or a wave from the ocean. You are not a stranger here. Being is your birthright, your natural state, your fundamental essence, and yet we treat it as some distant achievement. Why is this? I suggest it's because we've been thoroughly hypnotized by our education, our language, our social conditioning to believe that we are separate from being. We've learned to think of ourselves as lonely little egos trapped in bags of skin, desperately trying to make contact with the world outside ourselves. What a hallucination! What a magnificent hoax we've played on ourselves. You are being itself, expressing itself as this particular form in this particular moment. The paradox dissolves when you realize you've been trying to become what you already are. Now, let's look at this curious obsession with becoming. The Western mind particularly is hypnotized by progress, by development, by the notion that you must constantly improve yourself. What a treadmill we've created. Always running, never arriving. You see, the idea of becoming rests on a fundamental deception, that you are not already what you're seeking to become. It's as if the sun were trying to become bright, or water were trying to become wet. How unnecessary, how utterly redundant. I've often observed that this compulsive becoming is like trying to reach the horizon. The faster you run toward it, the faster it moves away from you. And this creates a peculiar form of suffering that I call the backwards law. The more desperately you try to be something, the more you reinforce the feeling that you are not that thing. The Zen masters understood this perfectly. That's why they would say things like, if you seek the Buddha, you cannot find the Buddha. Because in seeking, you imply absence. But what if you're already complete? What if there's nothing to improve? What if the very idea of self-improvement is the only obstacle to discovering your inherent perfection? Now that is a thought worth contemplating. Time, you see, is central to our inability to simply be. Because being is always now, whereas becoming is always projected into some imaginary future. I find it fascinating that we've developed a way of experiencing life where we're almost never present. We are constantly remembering the past or anticipating the future. But life only happens now. The past exists only as memory, the future only as imagination. Both are mental constructs appearing in the present moment. You see, now is the only time there ever is. When will you ever experience anything other than now? Even when you remember the past, you're remembering now. When you anticipate the future, you're anticipating now. So this eternal present is the realm of being. It's where life actually happens. And yet we spend most of our time mentally rehearsing what hasn't happened yet or reviewing what no longer exists. What a way to miss your life entirely. I sometimes use the analogy of driving a car while looking only in the rearview mirror. You're so concerned with where you've been that you're not paying attention to where you are. Simply being invites us to drop this peculiar habit and experience life directly as it is right now. Now, one of the most persistent obstacles to simply being is our fascinating addiction to the illusion of control. We're convinced that if we could just manage everything properly, direct all the variables, then we'd finally be at peace. What a marvelous misconception. You see, the desire for control stems from a fundamental mistrust of the universe. It's as if we believe we're trapped in a hostile environment that must be subjugated, rather than a natural process that already includes us. I've often observed that trying to control life is like trying to control your handwriting by gripping the pen with white knuckles. The result is a rigid, trembling script. But when you relax your grip and let your hand flow naturally, the writing becomes fluid, natural, and far more beautiful. The Taoist sages understood this perfectly. They spoke of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or non-forcing. It's not about doing nothing. It's about allowing things to happen naturally, without interference, like a sailor who understands the wind and works with it rather than against it. Simply being involves surrendering this myth of control, not in a passive, fatalistic way, but in the recognition that you are not separate from the flowing process of the universe. You are that process. And in that recognition, there's nothing to control and no one to do the controlling. One of my favorite ways of understanding existence is as a form of play, not as a serious business with some grave purpose, but as a spontaneous expression of joy and creativity. You see, the universe isn't going anywhere. It isn't trying to achieve anything. It's more like music or dance. The purpose of music isn't to arrive at the final note. The purpose of dancing isn't to end up at a particular spot on the floor. The purpose, if we can even use that word, is the playing itself. The Hindu tradition calls this Leela, divine play. The idea that the entire cosmos is a kind of game that the Godhead is playing, not for any reason, but for the sheer delight of playing. When you understand this, you can begin to participate in life with a similar spirit, not always asking, what's the use of this or where is this getting me, but simply engaging in the extraordinary miracle of existence for its own sake. A child building sandcastles doesn't worry that the tide will come in. The joy is in the building, not in the permanence of the result. Simply being is approaching life with this same playful spirit, finding delight in the dance rather than obsessing over where the dance might lead. There's a fascinating paradox at the heart of being that the Zen tradition expresses beautifully. It's what I like to call the empty fullness, or the full emptiness. You see, when you genuinely allow yourself to simply be, you discover something quite startling. There's no solid you to be found anywhere. What we call I, or myself, is not a thing, but a process. Not a noun, but a verb. It's rather like trying to find the dancer apart from the dance. When you look closely, there is only dancing. No solid entity called dancer can be found. The Buddha's insight into anatta, or no self, wasn't a depressing nihilism. It was a liberating recognition that what we are is not limited to this temporary form. We are the formless taking form. This emptiness is not a vacuum. It's pregnant with possibility, like the empty space in a cup that makes the cup useful, or the empty space in a room that makes the room livable. So in simply being, we're not trying to be something or someone specific. We're allowing ourselves to be this boundless, indefinable aliveness that has no edges, no limitations. And paradoxically, in this emptiness, we find a fullness beyond anything we could have imagined. Now, one of the most persistent illusions that prevents us from simply being is what I like to call the myth of the skin-encapsulated ego. This is the belief that you are inside your skin and the world is outside. What a peculiar idea. When you really consider it, where exactly does the boundary lie? Is the air in your lungs you or not you? What about the bacteria in your intestines, without which you couldn't digest food? Are they you or not you? You see, the line between self and other is arbitrary at best. It's a social convention, a useful fiction perhaps, but not an absolute reality. I've often suggested that we're more like whirlpools in a flowing river. The whirlpool has a recognizable pattern, a temporary identity, but it's inseparable from the water that flows through it. You can't take a whirlpool out of the water because there is no whirlpool apart from the water's movement. Similarly, you are a pattern of energy in the total energy field of the universe. Not separate from it, not inside it, but it expressing itself as this unique configuration called you for a brief time. When we recognize this, simply being becomes natural. There's no separate self that needs to achieve or become. There's just the universe doing what it does, which includes this temporary pattern we call me. Let me share with you this marvelous Taoist concept of Wu Wei, which I touched on earlier, but which deserves its own exploration. Wu Wei is often translated as non-action or non-doing, but I prefer to think of it as effortless action or the art of not forcing. You see, there's a profound difference between making something happen and allowing it to happen, between forcing and flowing. Most of us have been taught to approach life like a conquest, something to be wrestled into submission, but the Taoist masters observed nature and saw something quite different. Water doesn't struggle to flow downhill. Trees don't strain to grow. These things happen naturally, of themselves. The Chinese call this Zhujian, which means of itself so, or spontaneity. It's the recognition that the universe has its own intelligence that far exceeds our conscious calculations. I'm reminded of the story of the centipede who was asked how it coordinated all its legs. Once it started thinking about it, it became paralyzed and couldn't walk at all. This is what happens when we try to control what is best left to our innate intelligence. Simply being involves trusting this natural wisdom, not fighting against life, but dancing with it, not imposing our will upon the universe, but aligning ourselves with its flow, and in this alignment, we discover a kind of effortless power that accomplishes more than our striving ever could. One of the most fascinating aspects of simply being is embracing uncertainty. You see, the ego craves certainty. It wants everything neatly categorized, labeled, and controlled. It wants to know exactly what will happen next. But reality is fundamentally uncertain. It's always in flux, always surprising, always new. And there's a profound wisdom in acknowledging this. I've often suggested that clinging to certainty is like trying to grab hold of water. The tighter you squeeze, the less you have. But if you open your hand and allow the water to rest there, it remains with you. The Zen tradition speaks of beginner's mind, or shoshin. It's the art of approaching each moment fresh, without preconceptions, without certainty, like a child seeing snow for the first time. When we embrace uncertainty, something remarkable happens. We become available to the actual reality of the present moment, rather than our ideas about it. We discover that what we don't know is infinitely more interesting than what we think we know. And paradoxically, in this state of not knowing, of openness and receptivity, we find a kind of certainty that's much deeper than intellectual knowledge. It's the certainty of being itself, which requires no proof or validation. It simply is. In this final chapter, I'd like to suggest that simply being is not something esoteric or separate from ordinary life. It's not a special state reserved for mystics or hermits on mountaintops. It's the natural recognition of what we have been all along. You see, what we're seeking is not something new or different from what we already are. It's more like coming to recognize that we've been wearing glasses all our lives, glasses that we mistook for our eyes themselves. The Zen masters have a wonderful saying: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities are the same, but the understanding is profoundly different. In simply being, we're not trying to escape the ordinary world. We're discovering the extraordinary within the ordinary. We're recognizing that this moment, exactly as it is, with all its imperfections and messiness, is the perfect expression of being itself. I'm reminded of the Zen story of the monk who asked his master, "What is enlightenment?" The master replied, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." The monk protested, "But that's what everyone does." And the master said, "No, most people when eating are thinking of 1,000 other things. When sleeping, they're dreaming 1,000 dreams. They're never fully present in what they're doing." Simply being is this awakening to the fullness of our ordinary existence. It's the recognition that we don't need to become anything. We don't need to add anything to this moment. We are already complete. We are already whole. We are already exactly what we seek. So you see, this business of simply being isn't about acquiring some new spiritual technique or achieving some exotic state of consciousness. It's about recognizing what has been true all along. You are not separate from the universe. You are not a tiny fragment in a vast, indifferent cosmos. You are the entire process of reality expressing itself as this unique form in this unique moment. As I like to say, you are the universe experiencing itself as a human for a little while. And in simply being, you allow that extraordinary truth to reveal itself naturally, without force, without struggle. So I invite you to let go of the exhausting effort to become something else. Let go of the idea that you need to improve, fix, or transform yourself. Instead, simply be. Be this aliveness that you already are. Be this awareness that's reading these words. Be this mysterious, indefinable presence that can never be captured in concepts or words. And in that simple being, you might just discover that what you've been seeking all along is what's been present from the very beginning. The treasure was always buried in your own backyard. You just needed to stop looking elsewhere to find it.
Would you consider yourself someone who's just waiting for the right time? You know, the right time to start that project, to end that relationship, to move to that city you've dreamed about, or even to simply live the way you secretly want to. You tell yourself, "I'll do it when I'm ready," or "when the timing is perfect." And so you wait. Days pass, months pass, years pass. And then one day, you look back and realize the right time never actually arrived. Because it doesn't exist. It was never meant to. Life doesn't work like that. We humans are masterful at convincing ourselves that the present moment is somehow inadequate for action. We believe we need more certainty, more preparation, more signs from the universe that it's safe to proceed. And in doing so, we miss the only moment that ever truly exists, this one. I want to tell you something you might not like. You will never feel completely ready for anything worth doing. Readiness is not a place you arrive at. It is something that arises because you start. Waiting for the right conditions is like waiting for the ocean to stop moving before you swim. You will wait forever. Think about it. Every major decision in your life, the one that changed everything, probably came with uncertainty, maybe even fear. But you acted anyway. And if you hadn't, you wouldn't be where you are now. This so-called right time we cling to is a mirage. The mind paints it as a safe, golden moment in the future when all obstacles disappear, when courage is effortless, and when success is guaranteed. But the truth is, life is never without risk. Every moment is tinged with unknowns, with imperfect circumstances, with distractions and doubts. That is the human condition. And yet, action has always belonged to those willing to begin despite it. We postpone life in countless ways. I'll travel when I have more money. I'll say how I feel when the moment is perfect. I'll start creating when I've mastered every skill. But in reality, these are excuses dressed as logic. The longer we wait, the heavier the weight becomes. Opportunities fade. Enthusiasm cools. The door we swore we'd walk through one day quietly closes, and we're left wondering why we didn't take a step when it was open. Alan Watts once said, "This is the real secret of life, to be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now. The right time is simply the time you choose to begin." And here's something else. The right time is often a disguise for fear, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of discomfort. We tell ourselves we're being patient or strategic, but more often than not, we're avoiding the raw vulnerability of action. But here's the paradox. The fear doesn't go away by waiting. It fades only through moving forward. You've probably noticed this. The conversation you dreaded, the leap you feared once you did it, it was never as monstrous as your mind imagined. You realized that the hardest part was simply beginning. Life rewards momentum, not hesitation. Now, imagine your life as a book. If you keep waiting for the right time to start the next chapter, the story never moves. The plot stagnates. And while you wait, the pages keep turning anyway, filled with scenes you didn't choose, written by circumstances rather than by you. At some point, you must accept that the only right time is the one you claim. The longer you hesitate, the more you hand over authorship of your life to chance. And chance doesn't care about your dreams, it simply fills the void you leave. The universe, in all its vast mystery, doesn't send engraved invitations. It sends whispers. It nudges. It places opportunities in front of you, disguised as challenges, detours, or imperfect conditions. And if you're too busy waiting for a perfect sign, you'll miss them. People imagine that the universe is withholding their destiny until they've earned it. But in reality, the universe is always offering, always flowing. It's our hesitation, our clinging to the fantasy of later, that keeps us from receiving it. Here's something radical. You don't need more time to start. You need less waiting. The conditions you think you need are often revealed after you begin, not before. You learn by doing, not by endlessly preparing. The courage you believe you lack appears the moment you step forward. The skills you think you need to master are sharpened in the act itself. Action is the alchemy that transforms fear into clarity, uncertainty into direction. Without it, you remain in the purgatory of someday, a place where nothing grows except regret. Think of all the people who told themselves they'd start when they were ready, only to watch someone with less experience, less certainty, and fewer resources leap ahead simply because they acted. The difference between them isn't talent or luck. It's the willingness to begin in the midst of imperfection. And here's the thing. Life doesn't favor the one who waits. It favors the one who shows up, even if they stumble, even if they fail. Because failure, at least, moves you forward. Waiting keeps you still. The problem with waiting for the right time is that it tricks you into believing you have infinite tomorrows. But you don't. Life is not a rehearsal for something better. Later, this is the show. The clock is ticking whether you participate or not. And one day, the one day you were waiting for will simply be gone. You'll realize that the perfect conditions you imagined were never coming, and that the years you thought you were preparing were actually the years you were living. There's a kind of heartbreak in that, but also a kind of awakening. Because once you see that the right time is a myth, you're free. Free from the illusion that your life begins later. Free from the idea that you need permission to start. And in that freedom, you begin to act. You start the book without knowing the ending. You take the trip without a perfect plan. You say the words without rehearsing them 1,000 times in your head. And yes, you might stumble. Yes, you might fail. But even then, you'll be living really, living instead of waiting. The moment you choose to act, the waiting ends. I want you to think of a river. If you stand on the bank forever, waiting for the water to calm before you step in, you'll be there for eternity. The river doesn't stop moving. It doesn't care about your readiness. It only offers you the choice. Step in now or watch it pass. Life is no different. The current will keep flowing. People will come and go, opportunities will appear and vanish. And the only thing you can truly lose is the chance you never take. The river doesn't wait for you, so why do you wait for it? It's worth asking yourself honestly, what exactly are you waiting for? More money? More confidence? A sign from the universe? Those might seem like legitimate reasons, but often they're disguises for fear. You think you're waiting for resources, but you're really waiting for certainty. And certainty is something life almost never gives. In fact, certainty tends to show up after you leap, not before. You've experienced this. The courage comes in the doing, not in the waiting. Yet still, we cling to the fantasy that one morning we'll wake up feeling completely fearless, ready to conquer the day. It's a lie. The truth is, readiness is created through action. You become ready because you began, not the other way around. The person who learns to swim doesn't wait until they're a perfect swimmer to enter the water they get in. They splash, they choke a little, and they learn. Life works exactly the same way. The path to confidence, clarity, and even mastery starts with one imperfect step. That step feels uncomfortable because it is supposed to. It's the discomfort that shapes you. And while you wait for the right time, someone else is taking that step and changing their life. Now, there's something dangerous about postponing life that many people overlook. Waiting becomes a habit. The more you delay, the more natural it feels to delay again. Before you know it, you're not just waiting for the right time to do something important, you're waiting for the right time to live. And the tragedy is that time never arrives. Because life will always give you a reason to wait. There will always be bills, responsibilities, uncertainty, and imperfections. If you make waiting your default, you'll reach the end wondering when your life actually happened. The irony is that while you're waiting for the perfect time, life itself is happening. The sunsets you could be watching, the conversations you could be having, the moments you could be creating, they're unfolding right now without you. And they will never repeat in exactly the same way. The people you love will not always be here. The opportunities in front of you will not always be there. This is not meant to scare you, but to wake you up. If you knew you had only a year left, would you still be waiting? Or would you start? The right time doesn't exist for another reason. You are always changing. The version of you that's waiting today will not be the same version that finally decides to act. And sometimes, by the time you feel ready, the thing you wanted has already slipped through your fingers. We forget that desire has a lifespan. Dreams can expire if neglected for too long. What felt urgent and alive at 25 might be nothing but a faded curiosity at 40. The question is, will you answer the call while it's still burning in you, or will you let it die quietly? Here's the strange thing. You'll never regret starting too early as much as you'll regret starting too late. Beginning before you feel ready might give you some awkward mistakes, some wrong turns, but beginning too late robs you of years you can never reclaim. Time has a way of erasing the luxury of hesitation, the projects you never began, the people you never called, the love you never confessed. They don't sit patiently on the shelf waiting for you. They vanish quietly while you're busy making plans. The lesson? You can correct a mistake. You cannot reclaim a moment. Many people confuse waiting for the right time with being strategic. I'm just thinking it through, they say, but often thinking it through is just overthinking it out of existence. You can plan so much that the fire dies before you've even lit the match. Action creates momentum. Planning without action creates only a thicker wall between you and your life. Of course, some planning is necessary, but you must know the tipping point where it shifts from useful to paralyzing. Cross that point, and the dream you had is already starting to fade into nothing more than an idea. I've spoken to countless people who say they want to write, travel, start a business, fall in love, and yet they've been preparing for years. They don't realize that their preparation is simply another name for avoidance. They're waiting for courage to knock on the door. But courage doesn't knock. It's built moment by moment as you step into the thing you fear. The truth is, you cannot think yourself into bravery. You can only act your way into it. And that means taking the first step without knowing exactly where the second one will land. Why do we fear starting before the right time? Because it feels safer to stay in the realm of potential. As long as your dream is in your head, it's perfect. It hasn't been tested, judged, or rejected. The moment you act, reality has a say. and reality is unpredictable. But here's the paradox. Reality is also where all the good things live. Love, joy, connection, discovery, none of these exist in the safety of your imagination. They require you to step into the messy, unpredictable now. Potential is perfect, yes, but it's also lifeless. Only action breathes life into it. There's an ancient Zen saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. It applies to almost everything in life. You can't go back and start earlier. You can only start now imperfectly, messily, vulnerably. And if you truly understand this, you stop torturing yourself with regret over the past. You stop saying, if only I had started sooner. Instead, you say, I'm starting now and that's enough. The only moment you can ever act is the one you're in. So if not now, when? I remember a conversation with a man who said he was waiting until retirement to really live, to travel, to write, to explore. He had it all mapped out, work hard now, enjoy life later. But later never came. A sudden illness took him before his right time arrived. And that's the danger. You are not promised later. Later is an assumption. Now is the only guarantee. The right time you're banking on might never show up. And in the meantime, the life you could be living is passing by like scenery from a train you forgot to board. So, what happens when you stop waiting? Life expands. You start to see possibility everywhere because you're no longer filtering it through, is this the perfect time? Instead, you're asking, is this worth doing now? And more often than not, the answer is yes. You begin to realize that starting is the thing that makes time right, not the other way around. You also discover that most fears dissolve once you're in motion. The phone call you dreaded, the trip you kept postponing, the conversation you were avoiding once you're in them, they're never as terrifying as they seemed in your head. Let me be clear. I'm not saying you should be reckless. I'm saying that waiting for perfection is far riskier than acting in imperfection. Life rewards movement. It rewards those who show up, even with shaking hands and uncertain steps. The opportunities that change everything often appear when you're already in motion, not when you're sitting on the sidelines. And here's the beauty. Once you start, the so-called right time has a way of appearing in hindsight. You look back and think, that was exactly when I needed to begin, even if, at the time, it felt far too early. The truth is, there is no finish line where you suddenly feel ready for life. Readiness is not a destination, it's a habit. It's built every time you choose to act in the face of doubt. Every time you do the thing before you feel qualified. Every time you decide that the cost of waiting is greater than the cost of beginning. And with each of these choices, you discover that life isn't something you prepare for endlessly. It's something you participate in right now. Consider this. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready to throw challenges in your path. The unexpected illness, the sudden job change, the person who walks away, none of these events pause to check your calendar first. They arrive unannounced and you deal with them in the moment. If life's difficulties don't wait for you to be ready, why should its opportunities? Waiting for the right time assumes the universe will align itself neatly for your plans. But the universe doesn't work that way. It offers openings in the middle of chaos, and your job is to notice and step in. Some of you might be thinking, but what if I fail? And I understand. Failure is embarrassing. It stings. But failure is also a compass. It points you toward the adjustments you need to make. The people who create lives they're proud of aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who stop seeing failure as an ending and start seeing it as feedback. Each attempt, each stumble, each awkward first step is a teacher. And you cannot meet that teacher if you never leave the safety of the classroom of your mind. There's another hidden danger in waiting for the right time. You can accidentally become addicted to waiting itself. It's comforting to think you're almost ready. You get the sense of progress without taking the risks of progress. It's like rocking in a chair. You're moving, but you're going nowhere. And while you wait, the energy you once had fades. Enthusiasm is perishable. Leave it too long and it spoils into apathy. The window for action is often smaller than we think, not because life closes it, but because we stop feeling the urgency to step through. Think of the great stories you've heard in books, in films, in your own life. Do they begin with the hero saying, "I waited until the right moment"? No. They begin when someone, often unprepared, says yes to the moment in front of them. That yes sets everything in motion. You might believe you need more confidence before you can act, but here's the paradox. Action breeds confidence, not the other way around. The first step gives you proof that you can survive the unknown. The second step builds trust in yourself. And soon you stop asking if you're ready, you just go. Now, here's something practical. If you're someone who waits endlessly, start by shrinking the scale of what you think beginning means. You don't have to write the whole book today, write one paragraph. You don't have to run a marathon, take a 10-minute walk. The right time often hides inside small beginnings. These small starts teach you that perfection is not required for progress. And they're much harder to delay because they feel so doable. Once you start stacking small actions, momentum takes over, and suddenly you've begun without the fanfare you thought you needed. I once knew a woman who dreamed of moving to another country. For years, she said she was waiting until she saved a certain amount, until she learned the language perfectly, until she had a job lined up. The years passed. Her savings grew, her language skills improved, but the perfect moment never came. One day, she admitted the truth. She wasn't waiting for the right time. She was waiting for the fear to disappear. And fear never disappears completely. It only changes shape once you're moving through it. She finally went, not because the fear was gone, but because she realized it never would be. Fear will follow you into every chapter of life worth living. Love, creativity, adventure, they all demand that you feel fear and move anyway. If you wait to act, until you feel no fear, you'll be waiting forever. The trick is to stop asking for fearlessness and start asking for willingness. Willingness to look foolish, willingness to learn publicly, willingness to fail in the service of something that matters to you. This shift in focus turns waiting into moving. You stop trying to avoid discomfort and instead see it as a sign you're finally stepping into your life. The irony is that once you start living this way, you begin to see time differently. You no longer see life as a series of safe waiting rooms where you prepare for the real thing. You realize the waiting room was the real thing all along and you were wasting it. Every conversation, every sunrise, every mistake is part of the main event. The so-called right time is now because now is the only time you have. The people who embrace this truth don't necessarily live longer lives, but they live wider ones, filled with moments they seized instead of postponed. Let me leave you with a challenge. Think of one thing you've been postponing because the right time hasn't arrived. It could be calling someone you miss, starting a project you've been daydreaming about, or telling the truth you've been avoiding. Now, instead of asking, "Is this the perfect moment?" ask, "What small step can I take toward this today?" Then do it. Don't wait until Monday. Don't wait for the new year. Don't wait for more money, more approval, more certainty. If you can take one small step now, you have already broken the spell of waiting. You might feel clumsy at first. You might make mistakes. You might even wish you'd waited longer. But as time passes, you'll notice something. Those imperfect steps created a life that's real instead of one that's just imagined. And the joy of reality, even with its flaws, is far richer than the sterile perfection of an untested dream. The right time is not a date on the calendar. It's a decision you make to participate fully in your own existence. Every day you choose to do that, you've chosen the perfect moment. So, will you keep waiting? Waiting for fear to vanish? For the plan to be flawless? For the universe to send you a personal invitation? Or will you accept that the invitation is already here, hidden in this moment? The choice is yours. But I will tell you this, years from now, you will remember the day you began, not the day you planned to begin. You will look back and see that the so-called wrong time was exactly when your life truly started, and you will be grateful you didn't wait any longer. I'll end with one last thought. The right time is a mirage. You can chase it forever, thinking it's just over the next hill, only to find it was never real. What's real is now. What's real is the beating of your heart, the breath in your lungs, the chances within reach. If you keep postponing, you will reach the end having never actually arrived. But if you start now, even awkwardly, even without certainty, you will have lived. And in the end, That's the only measure that matters, not how perfectly you timed your life, but how deeply you lived it. So, take the call, write the sentence, book the ticket, say the words, start the thing. Not because everything is ready, but because you are tired of missing your own life. There is no dress rehearsal. This is it. And the clock is not pausing for you to feel ready. The only time you have is the time you take. So take it, now. And as you step forward, remember, the right time isn't coming. It's here. It's always been here. And the moment you stop waiting for a perfect future and begin living in the imperfect present, you will discover that life was never about timing at all. It was about showing up. And now, at last, you have. Who are you? That's the question we've all been trained to answer since we could speak. I'm Sarah. I'm an engineer. I'm a father. I'm a student. I'm this. I'm that. We present our identities like name tags, as if they could truly capture the vast mystery of what we are. But here's the truth. All those labels are costumes, beautiful ones, maybe, but costumes nonetheless. And the more tightly we grip them, the more we forget that at our core, we are something far larger, far freer, and far less definable than any identity could ever contain. From birth, society hands us scripts. You are given a name. You are given a gender. You are told which family you belong to, which culture you represent, which religion you might follow. As you grow, the script expands, your school grades, your career path, your relationship status. It becomes a kind of biography that you believe is you. But all of these things are not who you are, they are what you are doing. They are the roles you play in the grand theater of life. And like any good actor, you can switch roles. But the problem is, we forget we're acting at all. Why do we cling so fiercely to these roles? Because they give us a sense of stability. If I'm somebody, then I know my place in the world. It feels safe. But here's the paradox. The more you define yourself, the more you limit yourself. The moment you say, I am this, you've also said, I am not that. You build walls around your own potential. And worse, you start to protect this identity as if it were your actual life. You fear change because it threatens your story. You fear failure because it could rewrite your character in ways you don't like. This is why letting go of identity feels terrifying. It's like stepping into a void. If I'm not my job, my nationality, my beliefs, then what am I? We fear that if we drop the mask, there will be nothing left. But what if that nothing is not emptiness, but openness? What if behind the mask is the real you, not a solid, fixed thing, but a flowing, ever-changing awareness that can never be reduced to a label? Being nobody doesn't mean being worthless. It means being free. Free to flow from one role to another without fear of losing yourself. Think about the times you've been happiest. Was it when you were carefully managing your image? Or was it when you forgot yourself entirely immersed in music, laughter, love, or creation? In those moments, you weren't somebody trying to maintain an identity. You were simply alive. That's the beauty of being nobody. When you are not clinging to a self-image, you become like water, able to take any shape, able to meet each moment without the baggage of who you're supposed to be. And ironically, this is when life becomes the richest. Because you're not busy defending your story, you're living it. When we drop our identity, something extraordinary happens. Other people's opinions lose their power over us. If you're not trying to uphold a particular image, then criticism doesn't shatter you and praise doesn't inflate you. You're no longer a puppet pulled by the strings of external validation. Of course, society doesn't always like this. A person who isn't easily labeled can't be easily controlled. When you're nobody, you can't be boxed in, sold an image, or pressured to conform. That's why so many spiritual traditions talk about ego death. It's not about destroying your sense of self, but about releasing the prison of identity. The Zen masters have a saying, to be nobody is to be everything. At first, that sounds like nonsense, but think about it. When you stop holding on to I am this, you open yourself to being anything. When you let go of your fixed identity, you can fully enter the life of a parent, a friend, a stranger, a lover, a wanderer, without feeling you're betraying some static version of yourself. It's like being an actor who's free to play any role because they're not confused into thinking they are the role. The freedom is in knowing you can change the script at any moment. So, how do we begin to loosen our grip on identity? Start by noticing how often you say or think, I am, and fill in the blank. I am anxious. I am shy. I am successful. I am a failure. Every time you do this, you're locking yourself into a frame. Instead, see these states as temporary. You are feeling anxious, not being anxious. You are experiencing success, not being a successful person forever. Everything about you is in motion. And the more you remember that, the more you realize you've been fluid all along. Dropping identity doesn't mean you erase your history or pretend you're a blank slate. It simply means you stop confusing the map for the territory. Your life story is a beautiful map. It shows where you've been, what you've done. But it's not the same as the living, breathing reality of you in this very moment. And that moment right now is the only place you actually exist. When you're not trapped in the story of who I am, you can meet this moment fresh without dragging yesterday's script into it. That's where the beauty is. That's where the freedom lives. Here's the thing. People will still try to define you. They'll still say, you're the type of person who, or you've always been. But you can smile, knowing their words are only reflections of a moment, not a fixed truth. When you stop being somebody in the way the world demands, you stop running in circles trying to live up to expectations. You start living from the inside out instead of the outside in. And in that space, you might just find the most liberating truth of all. You were never the role, you were the actor, and the actor is free. Imagine standing on a beach, watching the waves. Each wave rises, takes shape, and then collapses back into the ocean. Your identity works the same way. It rises in moments, I am this, I am that, but then it dissolves, whether you want it to or not. The problem is, most of us try to hold onto the wave, to freeze it in place. We think, this is me forever. But the ocean has other plans. Everything changes, roles shift. Even the things you once felt defined, you can vanish overnight, leaving you wondering who you are without them. This is why clinging to identity can be painful. If your sense of self is wrapped up in your career, losing your job can feel like a death. If it's tied to a relationship, a breakup can leave you shattered. If it's based on youth and beauty, aging can feel like a personal betrayal. But when you stop identifying so deeply with any single role, these changes don't destroy you. You see them for what they are, just waves. They come, they go, and you are the ocean. Vast, spacious, unbroken. The ocean doesn't panic when one wave disappears. It knows more are coming. Here's something Alan Watts often said. You're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. Think about that. You don't have to drag yesterday into today. You don't have to carry the heavy baggage of all the versions of you that no longer fit. Yet, we cling. We keep the old clothes that don't suit us anymore. We keep living in old mental houses even when they're falling apart. Why? Because stepping into the unknown feels risky. If I'm not my old self, then who am I? That's the doorway. That's the invitation to find out. When you let go of the need to be somebody, life becomes more playful. You start to see identity like a set of costumes you can wear for fun rather than armor you must wear for survival. One day you might be the teacher, the next the student, the next the fool, and that's perfectly fine. You no longer need to win in the game of who's more important, more successful, or more admired. Because if you're not trying to be somebody, you're free from the exhausting competition. You can simply be without needing the world's scoreboard to tell you how you're doing. People often misunderstand this as detachment in the cold, uncaring sense, but it's the opposite. When you're not trapped in defending a self-image, you're actually more open to love, to connection, to intimacy. Why? Because you're not constantly filtering everything through, what does this say about me? You can truly listen to others, meet them where they are, and be with them without needing to fit them or yourself into a box. The irony is that when you stop trying to be special, you become profoundly unique, not because you're manufacturing it, but because you're letting your natural self shine without interference. Consider children. Before the heavy weight of identity is placed on them, they move freely between roles. A child can be a pirate, a chef, a dancer, a scientist, all within the span of an afternoon. They don't worry if it's consistent with their personal brand. They just play. That's the spirit you reclaim when you let go of being somebody. You remember that life itself is a kind of play, not in the sense of being trivial, but in the sense of being fluid, creative, and ever-changing. When you see it this way, you can embrace life's changes with curiosity rather than fear. Dropping identity also reveals how interconnected we are. When you're clinging to me and mine, you live in a constant state of separation, me versus them, my side versus theirs. But when you're nobody in the ego sense, those walls begin to crumble. You start to feel the subtle truth that you're not separate from life, you are life. The same consciousness that looks through your eyes looks through every pair of eyes. The same ocean that makes your wave makes every wave. And suddenly the idea of competing with others feels as absurd as one wave trying to outshine another. This doesn't mean you have to abandon all preferences or choices. Being nobody doesn't mean you drift aimlessly without any desires or values. It means you hold them lightly. You can prefer one path over another without building your entire identity around it. When you do this, you become more adaptable. You can pivot when life changes course because you're not gripping the wheel with white knuckles, terrified of losing who you are. And strangely enough, this flexibility often brings you closer to the life you truly want because you're not so busy resisting reality. The question then is, how do you live this out in a world that constantly pressures you to be somebody? You start small. Notice the moments when you feel the need to defend yourself, to justify your choices, to make sure people see you a certain way. Pause. Ask yourself, what am I protecting right now? Is it my actual life or just my image? Then, experiment with letting it go. Let someone think you're wrong without correcting them. Let a small criticism pass without defending your ego. You might find it's not as fatal as you imagined. Over time, you'll see that being nobody is not about erasing yourself, it's about dropping the layers that keep you from being fully alive. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that the truest joy doesn't come from being admired, respected, or remembered. It comes from living in this moment with open hands, able to receive whatever life is offering right now. Because when you're not clinging to who you are, you're finally free to experience the one thing that matters most. Not your story, not your image, but life itself. Here's a powerful practice. Whenever you introduce yourself, try describing yourself without mentioning your job, achievements, or roles. Just talk about what you love, what excites you, what you've been noticing lately. It feels strange at first, almost naked. We're so used to hiding behind the shields of titles and labels that without them, we feel exposed. But that's exactly the point. You start learning that who you are is not the same as the things you do. And the more you practice, the easier it gets to meet people without performing for their approval. In the West, much of our culture is built on the story of self-improvement, becoming a better version of yourself. While there's nothing wrong with growth, this constant pressure can turn into a subtle form of self-rejection. It whispers, you're not enough yet. You have to earn your worth. But the moment you tie your worth to an image, you've built a prison. Every improvement feels temporary because you're chasing an ever-moving target. When you let go of being somebody, you also let go of this exhausting race. You don't stop growing, you just stop growing to prove yourself. Alan Watts often compared life to music. The point of music is not to get to the end of the song, it's to enjoy the playing of it. If life is a piece of music, then identity obsession is like rushing to the final note just so you can say you played it. When you stop being somebody, you can dance with life instead of racing through it. Every note becomes enjoyable because you're no longer worried about how the song makes you look. You're simply in it, feeling the rhythm, without a finish line in sight. Of course, some people will misunderstand you. In a world obsessed with self-definition, being nobody can be threatening to others. They might say, you don't take life seriously, or you're avoiding responsibility. But in reality, you're taking life more seriously than ever because you're engaging with it directly, without the distortions of ego. You're not hiding in your resume, your Instagram bio, or your reputation. You're right here, living it. The irony is, this often makes you more reliable and present for others, because you're not constantly trying to manage an image in the background. So how do you balance this with the practical world, where people still expect labels and titles? Think of identity as a tool, not a truth. You can put on the costume of your profession when you need to, and then take it off when you don't. You can play the role without confusing it for your essence. This way, you're able to function in society without losing yourself in it. You can still be the doctor, the artist, the parent, or the engineer without believing those roles are the sum total of what you are. The beauty of being nobody is that it doesn't erase your uniqueness, it reveals it. When you're no longer locked into performing an identity, your natural quirks, curiosities, and talents rise to the surface effortlessly. You become more unpredictable, in the best way, less constrained by people like me don't do that. Thinking. You might try things you never imagined, explore paths you once ignored, or connect with people you previously would have dismissed. And because you're not protecting a rigid image, failure doesn't sting as much. It just becomes part of the dance. There's a profound humility in this way of living. You no longer need to be the smartest person in the room. You no longer need to have the last word. You no longer need to win every argument or prove your worth in every interaction. This humility doesn't make you smaller, it makes you spacious. It creates room for other people's truths, for new ideas, for growth without the constant friction of ego defense. And in that spaciousness, you discover that the joy of life isn't in dominating it, it's in participating fully, without needing to be someone special. Think of it this way, identity is like a mask. Masks can be beautiful and useful, but if you glue one to your face, it becomes suffocating. Being nobody is learning to take the mask off when you need air. And when you do, you realize something surprising, you can breathe easier. Conversations feel lighter, decisions feel freer. Even challenges feel less personal because you're no longer wrapping them around your sense of self. The less you cling to who you think you are, the more life can show you who you truly are. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual unlearning. You'll notice moments when the old need to be somebody flares up, maybe in a social setting, or at work, or even on social media. Instead of judging yourself, just notice it. Smile at it like greeting an old friend. Say, there's that little actor in me again, wanting to take the stage. And then, if you choose, you can step back and watch the play from the audience instead of being trapped in the performance. In time, this becomes second nature. You still play roles, but you don't lose yourself in them. You still tell stories about who you are, but you know they're just stories. And in that freedom, something beautiful happens. Life becomes lighter, yet deeper. You can hold joy without fearing it will vanish, and you can hold sorrow without believing it defines you. Because you're no longer a fixed somebody fighting to survive, you're the vast, open space in which all the somebodies come and go. Once you see through the illusion of being somebody, you start to notice how much of your life was spent protecting that illusion. The arguments you had, the sleepless nights worrying about what others thought, the energy poured into appearing a certain way, all of it begins to look unnecessary. You realize that the image you were protecting never really existed. It was a projection in other people's minds, constantly shifting depending on their own beliefs, biases, and moods. How exhausting it was to try to control something you could never truly control. Letting it go is like putting down a heavy backpack you forgot you were carrying. And here's the magic, when you stop trying to be somebody, you become easier to love. Not because you're doing anything to earn love, but because you're open. People can feel when they don't have to walk on eggshells around you, when they don't have to feed your ego for you to feel safe. Relationships become less about proving your worth and more about sharing your experience. Love flows more freely, not because you've perfected yourself, but because you've stopped trying to be perfect. Ironically, by letting go of being special, you become deeply special in a way that doesn't need recognition. Alan Watts often spoke about the absurdity of taking ourselves too seriously. Life, he said, is a kind of play, a cosmic game where the self hides from itself by pretending to be all these different characters. When you're nobody, You see the humor in it. You can laugh at your own mistakes without feeling diminished. You can admit you don't know without shame. You can even face your fears with a certain lightness, because you understand they're part of the grand performance. And in that laughter, there's wisdom. There's a recognition that we were never meant to hold on so tightly. This doesn't mean you won't sometimes get caught up in identity again. You will. The ego is a clever actor, always ready to jump back on stage. But each time you notice it, you'll have the choice to step away. You'll remember that the beauty of being nobody is that you can be anybody in any given moment. You're free to respond instead of react, to play instead of defend, to live instead of perform. The world becomes less like a battlefield and more like a playground. And that shift changes everything about how you move through your days. Think about the moments in your life when you've been most alive, completely immersed in what you were doing, without thinking about how you looked or whether you were doing it right. Those moments are identity, free moments. Nobody was performing in those instances. You were simply there. The practice of being nobody is really the practice of making those moments more common. Not by forcing them, but by removing the obstacles, mainly the constant need to manage your image. Life has always been here, waiting for you to show up without your mask. And here's perhaps the most liberating part. When you let go of identity, you stop comparing yourself to others. Without the scoreboard of who's ahead or behind, there's no need for jealousy or resentment. You see other people's successes as beautiful expressions of life, not as threats to your own worth. You see their failures as part of the same dance you're in, not as proof of your superiority. Comparison loses its teeth when you're no longer playing the game of being somebody. You're just here, doing your part in the unfolding of the universe. Some might say, but if I'm nobody, won't I lose motivation? And the answer is no. You might lose the anxiety that used to drive you, but what replaces it is curiosity and love. You start doing things because they feel alive to you, not because they'll make you look good. You work not for applause, but for the joy of creating. You help others not for recognition, but because you can't help it, it feels natural. It's not the death of motivation, it's the birth of authentic motivation. Being nobody doesn't mean disappearing from life, it means showing up without the armor. It's a shift from how do I look to what is this moment asking of me. You still have preferences, passions, and dreams, but you hold them lightly. You still set goals, but you don't collapse if they don't happen. You're more flexible, more open, more available to the surprises life offers. And perhaps, most importantly, you're no longer waiting for the world to validate you before you can feel okay. In the end, the beauty of being nobody is that it returns you to the truth you had as a child before you learned to be a role. You were just here. You didn't need to prove anything to be worthy of love or belonging. You lived in direct contact with life, without a thick layer of self-consciousness in between. And while you can't go back to innocence, you can go forward into awareness, a kind of second innocence, where you know the game, but you play anyway. Not because you need to win, but because you enjoy playing. So maybe the invitation is this. Take off the mask for a while. See what happens if you stop introducing yourself as your job, your achievements, your roles. See what happens when you let conversations be real instead of rehearsed. Notice how much lighter life feels when you don't have to protect an image. Notice how much deeper your connections feel when you meet people as you are, not as you think you should be. Because in the end, the freedom of being nobody is the freedom to be everything, to be the sky instead of the clouds, the ocean instead of the waves, the vastness instead of the mask.
Is a deeper question altogether, which is, what do you desire? What makes you itch? What sort of a situation would you like? Let's suppose I do this often in vocational guidance of students, and they come to me and say, well, we're getting out of college, and we have the faintest idea what we want to do. So I always ask the question, what would you like to do? If money were no object, what would? How would you really enjoy spending your life? Well, it's so amazing as a result of our kind of educational system. Crowds of students say, well, we'd like to be painters. We'd like to be poets. We'd like to be writers, but as everybody knows, you can't earn any money that way. Or another person says, well, I'd like to live in out-of-doors life and ride horses. I said, you want to teach in a riding school? Let's go through with it. What do you want to do? When we finally got down to something which the individual says he really wants to do, I will say to him, you do that and forget the money. Because if you insist that making money is the chief concern, you will spend your days utterly throwing your life away. You'll keep on doing things you have no love for, just so you can go on existing, that is, to go on doing the very things you have no love for, which is absurd. Far better to have a short life, overflowing with what delights you, than a long, drawn-out existence spent in drudgery. And after all, if you truly enjoy what you're doing, it doesn't matter what that thing is. Sooner or later you can become astonishingly good at it. That's the only road to mastery, to be completely absorbed in it. And when you are truly absorbed, people will gladly pay you well for it. So we needn't fuss about whether what you love is something others approve of. There will always be people who share that interest. In anything you can care about, others will care too. But it's downright foolish to waste your days doing what you hate, just to keep on doing what you hate, and worse, to teach your children to follow that same stupid path. Look what we're doing. We raise children, schooling them to repeat the very kind of lives we secretly despise. And all of this so they can, in turn, justify their existence by raising their own children. To raise their own children to do the same, round and round, like an endless retching, a great heave of vomit that never ever arrives anywhere. And so it becomes terribly important to sit with this question: what do I truly want? And when we first answer that, naively, childishly, we imagine we want to be gods of control, to bend the world entirely to our will, to make women who never grow old, fruit that never spoils, clothes that never tear, the machines that move us anywhere in an instant. So we never wait. Power to do anything we can dream of and do it, snap, just like that. This strange fantasy of technological omnipotence, but if you stop for a moment and really follow that idea to its end with the full strength of your imagination, you will see that's not what you actually want. Because the instant you live in a world where you are fully in control, where the future is perfectly predictable, you will discover, as I said before, a future that is entirely predictable is no future at all. It's the past replayed. You've already had it, and that's not what you long for. You want surprise, and you don't know what the surprise will be, because, of course, if you did, it wouldn't be a surprise. You want delightful surprises, but then you ask, what kind of surprise would be delightful? And you can't answer, because if you allow pleasant surprises, you must also allow unpleasant ones. You can't have one without the other. It's like playing one of those carnival lucky dip games. If you reach into the box, eyes closed, and pull something out, you don't know if you're getting a jewel or a dead rat. And that, you see, that seems to be the thing that really excites people. But, quite inevitably, when you follow this question deeply, you come to a great disillusionment with this whole ideal of power. To be powerful, to be in control, is not something any sane person truly wants. Now, you might object and say, but isn't that just shirking responsibility? If you were really a responsible human being, you would seek power and use it wisely for the good of all. All right then, the good of all. What exactly is that? Ask them, ask the people, well, here I am, absolute dictator, what would you have me do? And of course nobody knows, because they've never thought it through. They imagine all sorts of quick fixes, little short-term wishes, and they are hopelessly contradictory, because, as it turns out, nobody, and I mean nobody, really wants to be God. And I think this is perhaps the greatest lesson the Western world has yet to learn, because we are utterly obsessed with this idea of power, of control, of making everything go the right way. And we have never once stopped to ask, and when you finally get control, what then? And when you actually follow that question to the end, you see quite clearly, you don't want power. You don't want control over people at all. And so, in this search for what you do want, you eventually arrive at the point where every pleasure is laid out before you at command. And it all begins to feel dull. You start inventing new pleasures, and eventually you get like the ancient Romans, who had all these mad crowds of barbarians who had to go every Saturday to the Colosseum for a show that really had to surpass everything, because they had public baths, they had prostitutes, they had every kind of luxury. But when they went to see one of the big shows that people like Nero put on, they would have, for example, floats circling the Colosseum, all full of slave girls from distant parts of the Mediterranean, garlanded with flowers and waving at the crowd and going innocently around. In the next minute they would release wild lions into the arena to eat up all the slave girls. They got a big sadistic kick out of that, because you see, pursuing pleasure beyond a certain place takes you into what the Buddhists call the Naraka world. That is to say, the hells. When you have explored pleasure to its ultimate limit, the only thing you can get a kick out of is pain. So naturally you descend from the devil world at the top of the wheel to the Naraka world at the bottom, where it shows all these beings in states of torture. You get to the hell world as a result of not knowing what you want, as a result of thoughtless pursuit of pleasure, which ends you eventually in the pursuit of pain. So when you're in the hell, well, that's where you want to be. So when I ask, I go right down to the question, should be started with, what do I want? The answer is, I don't know. When Bodhidharma was asked, who are you? Which is another form of the same question. He said, I don't know planting flowers to which the butterflies come. Bodhidharma says, I know not. I don't know whatever. Well, when you don't know what you want, you've really reached the state of desirelessness. When you really don't know, did you see there's a beginning stage of not knowing and there's an ending stage of not knowing? In the beginning stage, you don't know what you want because you haven't thought about it. Or you've only thought superficially. And then when somebody forces you to think about it and go through and say, yeah, I think I like this. I think I like that. I think I'd like the other as the middle stage. Then you get beyond that. Say, is that what I really want? In the end, you say, no, I don't think that's it. I might be satisfied with it for a while, and I wouldn't turn my nose up at it. But it's not really what I want. Why don't you really know what you want? 2 reasons. Number 1, you have it. Number 2, you don't know yourself because you never can. The Godhead is never an object of its own knowledge. Just as a knife doesn't cut itself, fire doesn't burn itself, light doesn't illumine itself. It's always an endless mystery to itself. I don't know. This I don't know is the same thing as I love. I let go. I don't try to force or control. It's the same thing as humility. Anytime you, as it were, voluntarily let up control. In other words, cease to cling to yourself. You have an access of power because you're wasting energy all the time in self-defense. Trying to manage things, trying to force things to conform to your will. The moment you stop doing that, that wasted energy is available. Therefore, you are, in that sense, having that energy available, you are one with the divine principle. You have the energy when you're trying, however, to act as if you were God. That is to say, you don't trust anybody. And you're the dictator, and you have to keep everybody in line. You lose the divine energy, because what you're doing is simply defending yourself. So then, the principle is, the more you give it away, the more it comes back.
Have you ever noticed that the moment you try to catch something, it seems to slip away from you? And yet, the moment you open your hand and simply allow it to be, it seems to come to you naturally. I've been fascinated by this paradox for years. This curious way in which endings and beginnings are not 2 separate events, but rather 2 aspects of the same reality. What we call an end is merely a transition, a doorway into something new. And what we call a beginning is simply the continuation of an eternal dance. So let's explore together this fascinating mystery of how every end contains within itself the seeds of a new beginning. And perhaps we might discover that there are no endings at all, only transformations. You see, we in the Western world have become absolutely hypnotized by a peculiar kind of mythology. We believe that time moves in a straight line from past to future, and that things have definite beginnings and absolute endings. But this is a most curious illusion. Have you ever thought about where a circle begins? Go ahead, try to find the beginning of a circle. The very question is absurd because a circle, by its very nature, has no beginning and no end. And yet, we insist on seeing our lives as straight lines moving from birth to death. This linear thinking, this obsession with finality, is what creates our anxiety about endings. We see death as the ultimate end, the final curtain, after which there is nothing. But is that really so? Look at nature. When a leaf falls from a tree, is that the end of the leaf? Well, in a way, yes. But in another way, that leaf decomposes, becomes part of the soil which nourishes the tree, which will grow new leaves. The leaf doesn't end, it transforms. And so it is with everything in our lives. What we call an end is merely a transformation, a change of form. The end of childhood is the beginning of adolescence. The end of being single is the beginning of partnership. The end of one job is the beginning of another. You see, we've been taught to fear endings, to see them as losses, as failures. But what if every ending is actually a clearing of space for something new to emerge? What if endings are not walls, but doorways? As I like to say, The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. And this dance has no beginning and no end. It simply is. Now, at the root of our fear of endings is something even more fundamental. It's what I call the myth of separation. This curious idea that you and I are separate entities, isolated from the rest of the universe. You see, we've convinced ourselves that we're like little men and women sitting inside our heads, looking out at a world that is foreign to us. We believe we're born into this world, rather than from it, as if we're not indigenous to this planet, but visitors from somewhere else. This illusion of separateness is what makes endings so frightening. Because if I am separate from everything else, then when I end, I really end. If I am a fragment disconnected from the whole, then my ending is absolute. But let me suggest something fascinating. You are not separate from the universe. You are what the whole universe is doing in the place you call here and now. You didn't come into this world. You came out of it in the same way an apple comes out of an apple tree. Think of it this way. Can you have a left without a right? Can you have an up without a down? Can you have a self without another? Of course not. These are merely two sides of the same coin. And so it is with you and the universe. You are not a stranger here. You are an expression of the universe itself. Just as a wave is an expression of the ocean, the wave may rise and fall, but the ocean remains. When we truly understand this, we see that there are no endings, only transformations. Just as the wave doesn't die but simply returns to the ocean, so too do we return to the universe from which we arose. Not as an ending, but as a homecoming. A return to our source. In Chinese philosophy, there is this marvelous symbol of the Tao, the yin-yang. It's a circle divided into two teardrop shapes, one black and one white, each containing a dot of the opposite color. And they flow into each other in an eternal dance. What fascinates me about this symbol is how perfectly it captures the relationship between endings and beginnings. You see, in the Taoist view, opposites aren't really opposed at all. They are complementary. They need each other. They create each other. Consider your breath. You breathe in, and then you breathe out. The in-breath must end for the out-breath to begin. And the out-breath must end for a new in-breath to begin. If you tried to only breathe in, you would fail miserably. The end of the in-breath is the precondition for the beginning of the out-breath. Life works in exactly the same way. Day gives way to night, which gives way to day again. Summer turns to fall, to winter, to spring, and back to summer. Life gives way to death, which gives way to new life. This is the eternal dance of existence. The end of one thing is always the beginning of another. Not two separate events, but one continuous flow. As Lao Tzu said, to be empty is to be full. To have worn out is to be renewed. The ending creates space for the beginning. The silence between notes is what makes music possible. So perhaps instead of fearing endings, we might learn to see them as the necessary counterpart to beginnings. Not as failures or losses, but as essential parts of the cosmic dance. The black teardrop flowing into the white and back again in an eternal cycle of renewal. Now there's something rather fascinating about the nature of change and transformation. The Tao Te Ching says, the softest thing in the universe overcomes the hardest thing in the universe. Think about water, how it flows around obstacles rather than confronting them directly. And yet, given enough time, water can carve through stone. This is the Tao of transformation. Not resistance, but yielding. Not force, but flow. You see, the natural world doesn't resist change. The tree doesn't resist the changing of the seasons. It doesn't cling desperately to its leaves when autumn comes. It lets them go, and in that letting go, it prepares for new growth in the spring. But we humans, we resist endings with all our might. We cling to situations long after they've served their purpose. We hold on to relationships that have run their course. We grip tightly to identities that no longer fit us. And in doing so, we create tremendous suffering for ourselves. I remember a Zen story about a monk who was being chased by tigers. He came to the edge of a cliff and saw a vine growing down the side. He grabbed the vine and began to lower himself down. But then he noticed there were tigers at the bottom of the cliff too. And to make matters worse, 2 mice, one white and one black, began to gnaw at the vine. The monk then noticed a wild strawberry growing on the cliff face. He picked it and ate it, and it was delicious. This monk understood the Tao of transformation. He knew that resisting his situation would only create suffering. So instead, he fully embraced the moment with all its terror and beauty. This is the wisdom of transformation: to flow with change rather than resist it. To recognize that what appears to be an ending is simply a transformation, a change of form. Nothing more, nothing less. As I often say, the only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. Now let's talk about the ultimate ending that seems to concern us all: death. Our attitude toward death reveals everything about our understanding of life. In the West, we've developed a rather morbid relationship with death. We see it as the enemy, something to be fought, something to be conquered. We speak of people losing their battle with illness, as if death were some kind of failure. But what if death is not a failure at all? What if it's simply a transformation, a change of form? Consider a caterpillar entering its chrysalis. From the caterpillar's perspective, this might seem like the end. It's wrapped in darkness, its body dissolving, its former identity melting away. If the caterpillar had a human mind, it might be terrified. I'm dying. This is the end. And yet, what appears to be an ending from one perspective is actually a transformation from another. The caterpillar isn't ending, it's becoming a butterfly. Could it be that death works in a similar way? Not as an ending, but as a transformation. Not as a wall, but as a doorway. The Tibetans have a fascinating practice called phawa, which is essentially the art of conscious dying. They see death not as something to be feared, but as an opportunity for liberation. A chance to recognize our true nature beyond form, beyond identity. In this view, death is not the opposite of life. Death is the opposite of birth. And life has no opposite. So perhaps instead of seeing death as the end, we might learn to see it as a gateway to something new. Not an exit, but a transition. Not a period, but a comma in the ongoing story of existence. There's something curious about our perception of time. We tend to divide it into 3 neat categories: past, present, and future. And we imagine ourselves moving along a timeline from past to future, with the present as a tiny sliver of reality between what has been and what will be. But here's the fascinating thing. When exactly is this past that we speak of? Can you find it? Can you touch it? Can you go there? And what about this future that we're supposedly moving toward? Where exactly is it? You see, the past exists only as memory in the present moment, and the future exists only as anticipation in the present moment. There is only ever now. This eternal now is where all endings and all beginnings take place. It is the canvas upon which the entire drama of existence is painted. Consider the Zen koan: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. What does this mean? It means that enlightenment is not some future state to be attained. It's the recognition of what already is. The eternal now in which all things arise and pass away. When we truly inhabit this now, we see that there are no endings and no beginnings. There is only this eternal moment, this infinite present, in which the entire universe is forever being born and forever passing away. The great Zen master Dogen put it beautifully when he said, "If you cannot find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it?" The truth of existence, the mystery of being, is not somewhere else. It's right here, right now, in this eternal moment, where all endings and all beginnings are revealed as one continuous flow of being. Now, I want to talk about one of the most challenging and yet liberating aspects of existence: the art of letting go. You see, we humans have a curious tendency to hold on. We cling to our possessions, our relationships, our identities, our beliefs, as if our very existence depended on them. And in this clinging, we create tremendous suffering for ourselves. Because the truth is, everything in life is temporary. Everything changes. Everything transforms. And to resist this is to resist the very nature of reality. But here's the paradox. The more tightly we hold on, the more we suffer. And the more freely we let go, the more we receive. It's like trying to grab a handful of water. The tighter you squeeze, the more water slips through your fingers. But if you open your hand and allow the water to rest there, you can hold it. This is the art of letting go. Not a rejection of life, but a deeper embrace of it. Not a passive resignation, but an active surrender to the flow of existence. In Zen, there's a wonderful practice called shikantaza, which means just sitting. It's a meditation without object, without goal, without attainment. Just sitting, just being, just allowing whatever arises to arise and whatever passes to pass. This practice teaches us the art of letting go. It shows us that we don't need to hold on to create meaning. We don't need to cling to experience fulfillment. We can simply be open, receptive, allowing life to flow through us, rather than trying to contain it. And in this letting go, we discover a profound freedom. The freedom to experience life as it actually is, rather than as we think it should be. The freedom to dance with change rather than resist it. The freedom to see every ending as a beginning and every loss as an opening to something new. If you want to understand the mystery of endings and beginnings, you need look no further than the natural world around you. Nature is our greatest teacher in the art of transformation. Watch a garden through the seasons. In spring, everything bursts forth with new life. In summer, that life flourishes and bears fruit. In autumn, it begins to withdraw, to let go, to prepare for rest. And in winter, the garden appears lifeless, dormant, as if in death. But beneath the surface, life continues. The garden isn't dead, it's merely transformed. It's gathering its energies for the next spring, the next cycle of renewal. And so it is with all of nature. The tide goes out, only to come back in. The moon wanes, only to wax again. The sun sets, only to rise again. There's a wonderful passage in the Tao Te Ching that captures this perfectly. Returning is the motion of the Tao. Yielding is the way of the Tao. 10,000 things are born of being. Being is born of non-being. This is the wisdom that nature offers us. The recognition that all endings lead to new beginnings. That life and death are not opposed, but complementary. I remember once standing in a forest after a fire had swept through it. The scene appeared desolate, charred, lifeless. And yet within weeks, new growth was already emerging from the ashes. Certain seeds, in fact, only germinate after a fire. They need what appears to be destruction in order to begin their life. What if our lives work in the same way? What if what appears to be an ending, a loss, a death, is actually the precondition for new life? What if, like the forest, we need fire from time to time to clear away the old and make space for the new? This is the lesson that nature teaches us. Not to fear endings, but to recognize them as essential parts of the cycle of renewal. To trust in the wisdom of transformation and to flow with it rather than against it. Now, I want to share with you a rather delightful perspective on this whole business of endings and beginnings. It's what the Hindus call Lila, the divine play. You see, in the Hindu tradition, the entire universe is seen as a kind of cosmic game that God plays with himself. The divine hides from itself in countless forms, only to rediscover itself again and again in an eternal dance of forgetting and remembering. In this view, existence isn't a grim march from birth to death. It's a playful dance, a joyful game, a magnificent performance with no purpose beyond the sheer delight of playing. Think of children playing on a beach. They build elaborate sand castles, only to watch them washed away by the tide. And then they build new ones. They're not attached to their creations. They don't weep when the tide comes in. They understand intuitively that the joy is in the creating, not in the preserving. What if the universe works in the same way? What if all of creation, all of existence, is a kind of cosmic sand castle built for the sheer joy of building it? In this view, endings aren't tragedies. They're simply part of the game. The tide comes in, the sand castle dissolves, and a new one is built. The leaf falls, decomposes, and nourishes a new leaf. As I often say, the universe is a gigantic yes to everything. It embraces all possibilities, all forms, all expressions. And in this cosmic affirmation, nothing is ever truly lost. It simply changes form. So perhaps instead of approaching life with grim determination, we might learn to approach it with playfulness, to see it not as a problem to be solved or a journey to be completed, but as a game to be played, a dance to be danced, a song to be sung. For the sheer joy of playing and dancing and singing. Now, at the heart of our fear of endings is something very fundamental. It's what Buddhists call the ego and what I like to call the social self. This curious idea that we are this separate entity, this isolated individual, this skin-encapsulated ego, as I sometimes put it. You see, we've been taught to identify with a very limited aspect of our total being. We think, I am this body. I am this name. I am this history. I am these accomplishments. I am these relationships. And we become deeply attached to this identity. But what if this identity is not actually who we are? What if it's merely a character that we're playing in the grand drama of existence? In Hinduism, there's a wonderful concept called Tat Tvam Asi, which means thou art that. It suggests that our true identity is not this separate self, but the entire field of being. Not just the wave, but the entire ocean. Not just the leaf, but the entire tree. Not just the individual, but the entire universe. When we realize this, when we recognize our true nature beyond the ego, something remarkable happens. We transcend our fear of endings, because we see that what ends is merely a form, a temporary expression of something much more vast and much more enduring. It's like an actor who becomes so identified with a role that they forget their acting. They begin to believe that they are the character. And then, when the play ends, they experience a kind of death. But if they remember their true identity beyond the role, they can let go of the character without fear, because they know that they continue even when the role ends. And so it is with us. When we recognize our true nature beyond the ego, we can embrace the endings in our lives without fear, because we know that what we truly are cannot end. As the Upanishads say, the self is not born, nor does it die. It did not spring from anything, and nothing sprang from it. Unborn, eternal, everlasting, ancient, the self is not destroyed when the body is destroyed. This is the ultimate transcendence. The recognition that beyond all beginnings and all endings, beyond all forms and all transformations, there is something timeless, formless, and eternal. Not as some abstract concept, but as the very ground of our being. The awareness that witnesses all changes while itself remaining unchanged. As we come to the end of our exploration together, I'm reminded of something rather wonderful. That in speaking about endings and beginnings, we've been dancing around a mystery that can never be fully captured in words. You see, the deepest truths of existence can never be spoken. They can only be experienced. As the Tao Te Ching says, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. So I invite you to go beyond these words, these concepts, these ideas, to discover for yourself the truth of what we've been exploring. Look at your own life. Notice how every ending has led to a new beginning, how every loss has created space for something new, how every transformation has revealed a deeper dimension of your being. And perhaps, in that noticing, you'll discover what I've been pointing to all along. That beyond all beginnings and all endings, there is something timeless, formless, and eternal. Not separate from you, but the very essence of what you are. And in that recognition, you'll find a peace that transcends all understanding, a joy that needs no reason, a love that embraces all of existence, including its endings and its beginnings. For as the Zen masters say, before enlightenment, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. During enlightenment, mountains are no longer mountains and rivers are no longer rivers. After enlightenment, mountains are again mountains and rivers again rivers. Everything changes and yet nothing changes. Everything ends and yet nothing ends. This is the paradox. This is the mystery. This is the wonder of existence. And it's available to you right here, right now, in this eternal moment where all endings and all beginnings merge into one.